Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, as I mentioned pretty much at the top of every show, the purpose of Cal's Corner is to cover everything from politics to the paranormal, and that's a lot of different subjects. So, since that does include a lot of things, let's go a bit all over the map today and get caught up on some things, including world events. Now, on the Trump front, let's call it that, these are concerning matters regarding American President Donald Trump. A lot of stuff going on as usual. My thoughts on it are as follows. You have, of course, Mr. Cohen, his former lawyer. He's ramping up his profile in the news, of course, and not coincidentally, CNN has obtained a tape recording that Cohen allegedly made without the formal permission of Donald Trump. And of course, Trump is complaining about that because attorneys are not supposed to, especially when they're supposed to be on your side, record you without permission. So this is an issue. And of course, what Trump talks about, according to his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, it vindicates him, of course. And according to Cohen, it vindicates him. So who knows who's telling the truth? Obviously, if Cohen was in as deep with the Trump organization as it appears to be as he would know where the proverbial bodies are buried, so to speak. And we'll see how this unfolds. What is known is that special prosecutor Robert Mueller is looking at all of this stuff. He's still pursuing the obstruction of justice charges, which so far have eluded him in his attempts to get to the bottom of what's going on with Trump. If you look at the indictments that have come down against nearly 24 individuals, none of them nail Trump. And that's rather interesting because if there was this big collusion and quid pro quo that had been going on since day one would like to think that with the billions of dollars being spent of taxpayer money around the world by all of these dozens of intelligence agencies who were spying on Trump, spying on Putin, spying on people around Putin, spying on people around Obama, etc., you would think that they would have found something by now. But as I've reported as a journalist, they have not. And that in itself, sometimes absence of evidence is indeed evidence of absence, contrary to what someone like Stanton Friedman is fond of saying. And let me use just one example to prove that. There's a distinct absence of evidence that pigs can fly. Why? Because they can't. Okay? You can propel them out of windows, fire them out of windows like an artillery shell or whatever, but they don't naturally fly by themselves. You can throw them out of windows too, but that is still not flying, not on their own. So the reason there's an absence of evidence that pigs can fly is because they don't fly. There's also an absence of evidence that water is dry. Why? Because it's wet. So sometimes evidence of absence is indeed absence of evidence, or however that goes. Sometimes I get confused saying it myself, but the idea that it's not always the case and an exception disproves the rule doesn't always apply when there's no exception and rule to disprove. So again, that's a twisted approach that some UFO researchers take to the UFO subject. So applying that to the issue of Donald Trump, it has been interesting that in the years that they've been spying on him for over 2 years now, actively as well as passively, they haven't picked up anything. You would think, again, they would have found something by now because certainly enough people have been looking, especially his political enemies. And then, of course, you've got people like Manafort who have been indicted, but the charges against him, which may cause him to spend the rest of his life in prison, have nothing to do with the Trump campaign. They were for activities that occurred many years earlier because Manafort, as anybody who knows much about him knows, that he's a longtime political operative that goes back to the time of Ronald Reagan and even former Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos. So that's enough about the Trump stuff. A couple other notes. The economy seems to be on fire. Apparently, the GDP has been revised to 5%. That's about 2 times what it was on average under Barack Obama. Under Obama, although he's credited with having saved the economy from the bad recession and depression era type recession that George Bush handed to him when he became president, we have to remember that under Obama, the economy did stagnate even after it was in a so-called recovery. In fact, it was the worst recovery after a major recession in the history of the United States. since Trump took over, thanks in no small part to tax cuts for the rich and some trickle down effect, although not as much as to majorly change the lives of most Americans for the better. That's just the reality of how the Republicans run their economy and the way they approach tax cuts for the rich. They emphasize the rich, not so much the middle class. The economy has improved. There's no question about it. Apparently, there's more jobs now than there are people to apply for them, even if you include the wild element, if you will, or variable of illegal aliens. And that's quite a position for a country to be in. Trump's critics are now not knowing what to do with themselves after apparently the latest round of success with talks with the European Union. If you listen to the Trump critics, you'd swear the world was going to end because Trump was slapping tariffs on a bunch of different countries, one of which was the European Union. Well, it turns out that the head of the EU came out to the White House and they managed to find a way magically to work a last-minute deal so that in the areas of automobiles and trading with for certain products from Europe and, of course, car manufacturing, the playing field will be much more even going forward. And we can thank Donald Trump for that because he forced the issue to a head, just like Trump critics are all upset that he's actually trying to get NATO to pay their fair share, even though they haven't paid their fair share of the budgets and military defense commitments that they've promised to for years now. American presidents have gone over there hat in hand, practically begging them to do it, which is wrong on principle. These European countries know that without the United States, they'd all be speaking Russian today. And what has happened is they haven't held up their fair share. Trump campaigned on the issue of holding them accountable, that he wasn't going to allow them to get away with that anymore. And so far, that appears to be working as well, much to the chagrin of Trump's haters and his critics, and for what I call apologists for the European Union. There is nothing wrong with a country that should meet its commitments, especially when they make a point to say, hey, I'll give you 2% of my GDP and help militarily. Then they renege on that promise. That is wrong. And Trump is right to go ahead and hold them accountable for that. Now, you have some other events in the news. You have friction heating up between Iran and the United States. Iran, of course, continues to threaten the United States of America and Israel. They call the United States the Great Satan, of course, which is nonsense. And they call Israel Little Satan, which, of course, is just pure bullschlacken, to use some Yiddish term there. And that's Iran's foreign policy, death to America, death to Israel. They even have in Iran an annual event called Jerusalem Day, which is a euphemism for the destruction of Israel. And yes, Iran does celebrate that. They invite terrorist groups that they support, such as Hezbollah and Hamas. They come to Tehran every year. They burn American flags and burn effigies of American leaders. And of course, they hate Donald Trump. They hate Trump because he's had the nerve, the audacity to cancel the Iranian nuclear deal, which of course has Iran extremely upset. Now, from Iran's point of view, you can understand why they would be upset if this nuclear deal is canceled, because their free ride is basically over. You see, as somebody who's reported a long time on the Iranian deal, I've always been against the deal because it could have been better, but under the leadership of Barack Obama and John Kerry, I'm sorry, they acted cowardly. They gave away the farm. And Obama outright lied, as I've documented as a journalist reporting on this, when he tried to sell the Iranian deal to the global public. He outright lied about that deal, and there's no excuse for that. If there was if the Iranian deal were so great, it should sell itself, so to speak. You shouldn't have to lie to convince people that you have a valid argument. The moment any argument is based on lies, it loses its legitimacy. It doesn't matter what the subject is, and the Iranian deal is not an exception to that universal truism. Now, what are some of the lies that Obama said? Well, as we've covered on the show briefly, he talked about it being the most comprehensive inspection regime ever imposed on another nation. Nonsense. The inspection regimes in North Korea, Libya, and Iraq were much more extensive. And of course, in the case of North Korea, that failed so far until Trump has forced the issue to a head. Whether you like Trump or not, you have to give him credit that there has not been any more provocative missile tests from North Korea over the last few months. And that, of course, has his critics up in arms because they don't know how to respond to that. The fact that there haven't been is good news, but of course they don't want to admit that, because if they did admit that as good news, then of course they'd have to give credit to Trump, and they wouldn't want to do that. Hillary deserves all the credit, and we know that game that they play. So Obama lied about the deal with Iran being the most comprehensive deal there was. Remember the so-called disarming of Syria? That didn't go anywhere. Weapons of mass destruction continue to be used by that country. He also lied when he said that there are snap inspections. Now, a snap inspection means UN weapons inspectors can show up, demand to see a facility, snap, no notice, they're entitled to see it, but there are no snap inspections under the Iranian agreement. In fact, in order to see a facility that is disputed, you have to have 24 days written notice. Iran has a right to reject that request, and then it goes before yet another wonderful UN committee. 8 nations have to agree that Iran is in the wrong, and then Iran can always say, I'm not going to listen to you guys, and walk away anyway. That is how tough the Iranian agreement is. And perhaps Obama's worst offense was when he said that it was a permanent solution. Now, you can look up the word permanent. I certainly did in the dictionary, because I wondered after hearing Obama if somehow it had automatically changed. You never know in today's world where we have over 70 genders and ridiculous thinking like that. And what happened is it's not a permanent solution. Even Obama admits that the agreement essentially expires in 10 years. Basically, the bottom line is that the Iranian agreement kicked the problem down the road past 2 terms in office of Obama's successor, which at that time the Democrats unfortunately thought was going to be Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump proved them wrong. All right, we'll be back after this commercial break, and we'll continue here on Kal's Corner.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is, once again, Rob McConnell. Now, we're talking about Trump and catching up on world events. Obviously, tensions between Iran and the U.S. government are, of course, escalating. That's predictable. You have to remember, folks, and this is especially for apologists of Iran and those liberals who feel sorry for the fact that Iran has had the nuclear deal closed on them or terminated on them, at least for now. We have to remember that shortly after news came out and Trump had signed his order pulling out of the agreement, that Iran immediately threatened terrorist attacks against the United States. That's how much they love peace. Now, again, I'm going to repeat what I said. You can actually Google this, search right after within a day or two after Trump made his announcement that he was withdrawing from the Iranian agreement, and you will find that Iran was busy going back to what it does, making threats, again, to attack people with terrorist attacks. Iran has threatened to close down the Strait of Hormuz, which is not going to work because Iran's navy's a joke. They have no military ability to enforce that. Saudi Arabia has now announced that they are suspending the transport of oil tankers through the Red Sea because of Iran's threats. And what has happened is Iran has tried to fire a couple of missiles via its Houthi proxies against the Saudis. Saudi Arabia is an ideological, political, and geographic enemy of Iran, because you have to remember that what's going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a battle that has gone on for over 1,400 years. These are Muslims killing fellow Muslims, and they love doing that, by the way. I'm going to be honest with you. If you look at people who are into believing, Sunnis who are into believing that Shia Muslims are heretics and vice versa. Shias believing that Sunnis are heretics. Both sides claim to follow the one true path of Islam, quote unquote. They've been killing each other ever since Muhammad died. There was this problem for a successor, and they even killed his last wife, who was a young Jewish girl that he had married when she was, I believe, 11 years old. And so what happened is this struggle within Islam has gone on ever since then. This is why certain terrorist groups love to kill each other, because they believe they're doing God's work. And as far as I'm concerned, my own personal view, if Hezbollah and Hamas want to go at each other, I think we should set up a nice island and let them go have it. And, whoever wins, let them be the victor. Who cares? But there is this conflict in there, and it is real and hardcore because it's at the national level, meaning Iran's government is, of course, Shia Islam. They are the headquarters, if you will, of the Shia religious universe. And, of course, the Saudis rule the other side of that roost, which is the Sunni Muslims. They are the head of that. When you have terrorism in Pakistan, for example, unless it is a Shia group, most of it comes from terrorism sponsored by Pakistan from their fellow Sunni Muslims in Pakistan, who love, of course, to attack India because they're not Islamic. So this stuff gets complicated rather quickly, but again, it boils down to a bunch of basic stuff that happened over 1,400 years ago. And today's feud between those two countries, despite the Quran commanding Muslims not to kill each other, just like the Bible and the Pope forbid a long time ago Christians from killing each other, a lot of those followers didn't get the memo, and they engage in violence anyway. And of course, it causes problems for the rest of the peace-loving world. So that's what's going on in the Middle East. There is some tension there. An Australian diplomat has leaked to the media, this is a story that's a few years old, that he expects the United States to launch as early as next month a surprise sneak attack against Iran to destroy its nuclear facilities. Who knows whether that's going to happen, but he has indicated at least that Australia stands ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States should that action be taken. You see, if you now that Barack Obama's out of office, folks, uh, politicians are speaking up. They're no longer cowed by feeling that they have to be politically correct, and neither is some of the media. That the Iran deal is not a good one because it doesn't permanently eliminate Iran's abilities to make nuclear weapons. In fact, Iran's whole plan this entire time over these decades that they've had their secret nuclear weapons program is to reach breakout point and then use the threat of developing nukes to essentially extort concessions from the West. And of course, the West is often too passive and stupid enough to agree to pay an extortionist, just like it, tried to kowtow to Saddam Hussein for many years before that issue was finally brought to a head, meaning Saddam was removed from power. So in the case of Iran, it knows that it cannot fight a war that it could win of any depth or any length. It knows it is vastly outnumbered. It doesn't have an air force that is credible. Its air force goes back to the 1970s and still needs spare parts, by the way, to make it fly. Spare parts that are decades old from the old McDonnell Douglas company before Boeing bought them. And of course, the only thing it really has going for it are fanatical terrorists, which of course are a danger. These are people willing to kill anybody on command and die for, the so-called cause of God in their religion. And then, of course, it has about 1,000 missiles. That's about all it has. But it has about 1,000 missiles, and of course, if they were to be launched against a country like Israel, it would cause devastation that was beyond measure. On the other hand, Israel's a nuclear power, and they could easily retaliate, and there would be no Iran, literally. And Iran, of course, knows that. You see, while all of these leaders of terrorist groups, they talk about dying for God, dying for Allah, how glorious it is, you'll notice a pattern there that their followers don't seem to be aware of, and that's why these leaders of terrorist groups get away with the stuff that they do. You'll notice the pattern is that they get everybody to die for them while they live. Look at bin Laden. Look at the relative life of luxury and seclusion that he led in Pakistan. While he couldn't go and take his cat out for a walk, assuming he had a cat, since they don't like dogs, who knows. Point is, bin Laden wasn't hurting. He wasn't living in a cave. He was able to even watch porno. Bin Laden apparently had a lot of it, and that, of course, is against his religion. So these people who are terrorist leaders, they get away with what they get away with their crimes because they get people who are dumb enough to follow their orders and blindly do what they say, even if it means committing mass murder. They're brainwashed people. People are missing something. People who somehow found a connection or a sense of belonging in this terrorist group. And of course, the leaders of them, they love to live and stay alive and fight another day, or at least get people to do their bidding for them. And of course, they're not eager to go ahead and make those sacrifices. Bin Laden could have martyred himself many years ago if he was really serious, but instead he chose to, get other people to do it for him. And that's exactly how these people work. So you notice that the leadership of Iran is always talking about death to America, but they're not willing to stand there on the front lines and lead that charge because they want to live. And this is true of the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah and so on. And it's actually hypocrisy on their part. If they don't want to walk their talk, then they should be exposed accordingly. But people who believe their rhetoric are probably not critically minded enough to see through it. That's why they're successful. Same with this leader of the Islamic State. He's not sitting there with an AK-47 leading the charge up the hill. No, he's hiding out like a coward in a bunker somewhere, giving cryptic radio orders, some of which are followed, some are not. That's how these guys rule the roost. And this is a pattern that you see with global jihadi movements. Their leaders are quick to tell their followers, you must die for whatever, for our cause. But of course, they don't want to do it. And that should be your first sign that, they're hypocrites. All right, so that's enough about the Middle East. Yes, tensions are ratcheting up. Specifically, I want to end this segment on a note that where they are really ratcheting up is between Israel and Iran. But in this case, because Obama is not in power, Israel has a strong ally in American President Donald Trump. The United States is probably more pro-Israel during Trump's term than it was for many years under Obama, of course. You must remember that Obama was widely criticized, even within his own party, for what was called an apology tour. That is, that shortly after he came into power, he went to the Middle East and he started apologizing for American behavior, and he even went ahead and made it clear that he wanted some changes in the Middle East. Now, here's a person who ran against the idea of regime change, slammed George Bush for it, but as soon as he becomes president, he wastes no time in helping oust a longtime Egyptian dictator, Hosni Mubarak, who was probably the most steadfast U.S. ally in the region of the Middle East, other than Israel. He wastes no time in, of course, getting rid of Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, had him made sure he could be found and killed. And then, of course, he wasted no time mucking around in Syria because he got the bright idea that if he invoked regime change there, it might bring democracy to Syria. And Obama made the same mistake he attacked Bush over, which was having no post-war planning. And anytime you invade a country and destabilize it, and you don't have any post-war planning, you're going to end up with a lot of problems because you didn't prepare for anything. And that's exactly what happened in Iraq. There was no post-war planning when Bush invaded that country and removed dictator Saddam Hussein. As a consequence, Iraq became the most unstable region on the planet. And of course, the United States owns that debacle. It is still unstable. Iran has gained nothing but power during the years and influence in the region when Obama was president for 8 years in office. And of course, that is being now reversed under Trump. And of course, it needs to be. Iran needs to be curtailed, and they need to be exposed for what they're really about. On the other hand, the Saudis, because they are changing, they need to be embraced, and they need Saudi Arabia. We should embrace those changes in Saudi Arabia because they're westernizing and liberalizing, including giving women the right to drive cars, not cover themselves, and even fly fighter aircraft. All right, we'll be back after this commercial break here on Kal's Corner, and we'll continue, and we'll switch to different subjects, so-called paranormal. We'll be right back.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologist facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to Cal's Corner Radio here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show, once again, is Rob McConnell. Now let's switch to the so-called paranormal real quick. As you know, there's going to be a so-called blood moon coming up. It's due to hit any time now, and it, of course, is going to be the longest blood moon, apparently for the next 100 years. Now, every time there's a blood moon or an eclipse or some astronomical phenomenon, I get a little jaded when I hear these news events because I have two thoughts. One is great. I love eclipse, blood red moons. I love astronomical phenomena, and I love astronomy. It's the first area of science I fell in love with when I was about 4 years old, actually. I remember those days. And I've always been fascinated by, of course, with astronomy and other worlds, things like that. But when I hear that these things are coming, they're always accompanied by stupid headlines like people believe the world is going to end, there's going to be World War III because the blood moon is referenced in the Bible, whatever, some ancient texts. Folks, don't fall for this nonsense. I'm going on record as predicting that World War III is not going to start on cue when the blood moon hits. It's not going to last the length of the blood moon. And I don't think there's going to be a war that's going to break out having to do with the blood moon at all. If it does, I think it's a coincidence, or people who believe in this stuff might start some problems. And of course, that is a problem. We have to remember that in the late 1990s, millennial madness was sweeping the world again, especially the West and the United States and Western Europe. Millennial madness was simply that a lot of people believe around the millennium that Jesus is coming, or the world is ending, or the prophecies, or the prophets said this, whatever. There's all kinds of people out there who believe in weird things. But it didn't happen. In fact, I was one of the few people back then who was trying to tell the media, who wasn't listening, that this is just nonsense and it's predictable historic tripe, meaning every 100 years you always have end of the world types who are saying Jesus is going to come because the century is coming. Well, one could easily predict that that didn't happen, or it wasn't going to happen, and of course it didn't happen. That doesn't prove it won't happen if Jesus really was who people believe he was, but you can't prove it ahead of time. You can only say, well, it was written down, and it may or may not be true. Who knows? So the point is, I remember very specifically talking to the media, and they didn't seem to have an interest in a grounded story that would tell people, nope, the world's not ending. Just enjoy your New Year's Eve party in the millennium and live life. That wasn't as exciting as the idea that the world might be ending, or that terrorists might be looking to end the world around the year 2000. And Al-Qaeda was, at that time, trying to launch dozens of terrorist attacks. Around 50 of them were thwarted by the FBI and international law enforcement, most of which were never the details of which were never released publicly. There was a few of them. But to make a long story short, what happened, as you may recall, there was this Heaven's Gate problem. There was this cult, the UFO cult, formed by people who used to call themselves he and she. I remember them when I was a young boy because I didn't know what a cult was, and I remember asking Stanton Friedman about them. He told me about them, and that was their shtick back then, as they used to travel around the country, I believe in a van or a bus, something like that, and they used to recruit people to join their cause and eventually have contact with the aliens they said were from a mothership. All these decades later, they were still going strong. They had dozens of followers around the world. And of course, they got caught up in this Hell-Bop nonsense where supposedly there was a photograph taken of a alien ship that was a companion to the Hell-Bop comet. It turned out that that image in the photo was actually a digital artifact, a flaw in the processing of that data signal. But it caused a minor panic, and it caused this one particular group to freak out. They killed themselves. And then guess what happened? After they killed themselves, my phone rang off the hook. All kinds of media types wanted to talk to me because suddenly I was able to predict this accurately, which I thought was comical since I don't have psychic powers. I make that very clear to people. But I do understand history, and I am a student of history, and a basic read of history shows that thanks to religious superstitious nonsense, you have people believing that the world's going to end, or that this number means this, or it's a symbol for this, or because it's a 3, it must be a trinity, or whatever. You've got 3s, you've got 7s, you've got 12s, you've got 1. You've got this number stuff going on where people have all kinds of explanations to justify these numbers, even though numbers themselves are man-made constructs. It's a way to help us keep track of things. That doesn't mean the universe runs on them. If it were, it's mighty generous of the universe to take a human system and adapt it universally. But of course, it doesn't really work that way. That's just our ego projecting this. So now you have people predicting the blood moon means something significant other than basic physics of astronomy. I'm not going to bother explaining to you how a blood moon really works. You can Google it yourself. For those of you who don't know, you can learn something. All I'm trying to reassure you in my non-psychic way with no psychic powers is there's no evidence that the world is going to go through some special event just because there's going to be a blood moon. I wouldn't go ahead and sell my home. I wouldn't quit my job. I wouldn't pack up my family and go to the mountains and, try to survive the impending Holocaust or nuclear war. It's just not going to happen, folks. So hopefully you'll be a little objective when you listen to some of these predictions and just blow them off as just being a bunch of hooey, because that's exactly what they are. In fact, I do know people, because I know people who believe in all kinds of things around the world. I do know people who actually believe that a blood moon is a sign of something, some gloom and doom pending. Well, just like people tell me, the world was going to end on this date or whatever, I always ask them a simple question, and I would encourage you to do this. Ask them if they really believe what they're saying, and try to keep a straight face. If the answer is yes, they really do believe it, make them a bet. Ask them to bet anything that's important and see what happens. Most of the time, they won't do it. If you say, okay, I'll bet you your house or your car, it won't happen. All of a sudden, they're not so certain or confident. They don't want to bet, because if they lose that item. That's how full of faith they are. Now, on the other hand, if they do bet their house and they lose, because they're going to do that, you're still here today, so they obviously would have lost, don't keep it, give it back to them, whatever. The idea is to, try to prove a point that if you really believe this stuff, why don't you just, give up everything? You're so certain you're going to win. Well, they're not certain, because deep down, I think they know better, but why people believe in this stuff, I don't know. When I first came to India, I was shocked, for example, to find that not only was this the world's largest superstitious country in the world by far, but also that a lot of decisions are made based on things like astronomy. I actually met and am friends with people who got married based on what their astrologer told them. You must get married on this date because the stars are in your favor. It's a bunch of hooey, but that was their right to make that decision if they really want to believe that. I knew a woman, for example, their parents kept trying to find her a husband all the time, because often in India, it's not who the woman wants to marry, it's who your parents will tell you you're going to marry. They believe in arranged marriages. I have mixed feelings about that. I think it's ultimately between the two people. I have to admit, I do know people who are in arranged marriages and they love each other and it has worked out beautifully. They have a fantastic family. It's worked, okay, much to my surprise, because I believe in old-fashioned love. On the other hand, I also know people who have been in love where their marriages have just been disasters. So I've seen it cut both ways. Again, it depends on the individuals involved. But I remember one time their astrologer rejected 3 men in a row. So finally, this one set of parents, they were blaming their daughter. Well, it must be you. No, it's not her. It's this stupid idea that the planets can determine or should determine or even have a say or even care that who you're going to marry. They don't. They're just floating pieces of rock up there, locked in gravitational orbit. Deal with it, folks. That's all it is. It's nothing more. Anything more than that is just a bunch of superstitious nonsense. But unfortunately, billions of people, literally billions, believe in superstitions. I don't know of a single culture in the 27 countries I've had the honor of visiting or living in, depending on your definition. I don't know of a single culture that doesn't have superstitions. And some of them are kind of funny. When I was a young boy growing up and somebody told me, oh, if you break a mirror, you're going to have 7 years of bad luck, my reaction was, this is stupid. And that is still my reaction. And I don't know where that superstition comes from, but it is ridiculous. So again, folks, we have a blood moon coming up. I would encourage you to enjoy it for what it is, a very visually stunning phenomenon that is explained totally by physics, nothing more. And of course, physics always wins as long as we're physical beings. And the idea that the world is ending or there's some apocalypse or something biblical is going to happen, insert your superstition there, again, it's just not true. And if you really think differently, I would encourage you to put your money where your mouth is. And if you really go there and you want to make a fool out of yourself and lose whatever, you have that right. That doesn't make it right. And hopefully you aren't doing something that's going to impact somebody else. Like you wouldn't want to come home and say, well, honey, I thought the world was going to end, so I sold our house and I'm wrong and now we have to move out. You don't want to end up in that kind of situation. But I thought I'd mention this because it's starting to gather headlines where this gloom and doom stuff is being predicted. And of course, the press gives it credibility by even giving it a headline rather than just explaining to people that this is just nonsense. Don't fall for it. In fact, we're not going to waste our time on it, except maybe as a public service announcement for the gullible. But the media doesn't do that. They hype it a bit, especially the British press and the press in Europe, because those traditions go back even longer than they do in the United States. All right. We're already done with segment 3 here. We're going to come back after this commercial break for segment 4, and then we'll wrap things up by talking about a couple of different things, including an update on the upcoming X Zone Investigates series, which I'm very excited about. We'll be right back.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique, complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of Cal's Corner here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is, once again, Rob McConnell. Now, to summarize real quickly the blood moon thing, the reason this is special coming up is because Mars is going to make its closest approach to Earth that it ever has for the past 15 years or for the next 15 years. And it's going to happen during the longest blood moon eclipse of this century, of course. So what that means is that the moon and Mars will dominate the overnight hours on July 27th and into the morning of the 28th, which is really cool. And they'll be traveling across the sky besides each other while appearing to be only about 5 degrees apart, which is about the width of 3 human fingers held at arm's length. So you're going to see these there. In fact, I would encourage you to, if you have a smartphone, download any number of astronomy viewer Skyview apps, as they're called for short. When you download them on your phone, you can hold them up, above your head, point them in any direction in the sky. And what you'll actually see is all the stuff you're missing that you can't see with the human eye. So you can actually see where the different planets are. And there's one simple rule when looking at planets versus stars. It's very simple. Try to remember this, folks. If you look up at what you think is a star or a planet, well, how do you tell with your naked eye what the difference is? Well, it's very simple. Remember the old childhood nursery rhyme, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. If the light twinkles, it's a star. If it's a solid, emitting, steady light, it is a planet, okay? And the reason has to do with the obvious fact that stars emit light on their own due to the nuclear process. And, of course, planets reflect light that hits them and bounces off their atmosphere, like in the planet Venus. That's why it's so bright, because it's close and it's got a very reflective atmosphere. And it appears as a steady, bright white light, whereas a star will twinkle a bit. That's how you can tell the difference. And if you get one of these sky viewing apps, which I love personally, you can actually look at where these planets are and what the stars are, the constellations are, stuff you couldn't see from the human eye, especially with the human eye, especially if you're in a city. The viewing, of course, is much better in the countryside, in the mountains. All right, so that's enough about that blood moon. I hope you enjoy it. I plan on seeing it if possible. Unfortunately for me personally, I missed a lot of these celestial phenomenon for many years in India because I just wasn't in the right spot on the right world, in the right part of the world to enjoy witnessing them, including some of the total eclipses. In fact, I noticed a lot of them were very nicely viewable from the United States, but of course I wasn't there at that time, and I was in India and I missed it. But I envied the fact that my friends took some great pictures, like astronomer friend of mine named Bob Schaefer. He's taken some great photos over the years of some of these phenomenon, and thankfully he shared them on his Facebook page. All right, let's talk about things having to do with mysteries and outer space and aliens and all kinds of stuff like that. As I mentioned in the last show, folks, there is a series in production now called X Zone Investigates. I'm excited about it for a couple of reasons. One is it really has nothing to do with hosting it, meaning I'm hosting it. If I take myself out of it, let's say John Smith were hosting it or anybody else, I'd still be excited about this series because there's going to be at least 6 episodes to start with. And what the series will do in every episode is definitively solve a mystery. And the mystery can be from history, it can be from the paranormal. It is a universal mystery that most people either don't know the answer to or believe the wrong thing, or they're really into. It's something that's very popular. And of course, I haven't revealed yet what all the different subjects are that will be covered in the episodes. The only one episode I did mention, episode 6, is going to be the Tic Tac case, or what I mockingly call sometimes the Tic Toc case, because there's something really fishy about it. And of course, we will get to the bottom of that, as I announced last week, through the front door, doing good old fashioned investigative old school type journalism. That's how we're going to solve that case. We also use the same methods, of course, let's call them reality methods, if you will, of science and physics and forensics to solve some of the other mysteries as well. And that's, again, the most exciting thing about this series that I find personally most compelling. Imagine you're going to watch a 1-hour documentary on subject X, knowing that at the end of that show, you're going to have a mystery solved. And we must always welcome that. I know mysteries intrigue people. I love mysteries myself. But one thing I don't like are what I call man-made or artificial mysteries. These are contrived mysteries, so-called mysteries that exist but really shouldn't. Okay? I don't mind natural mysteries. I'm fascinated by everything I don't know. But again, what I don't like are BS or artificial mysteries, man-made mysteries, mysteries that exist when they have no valid reason to. Either the researchers were lazy, nobody did the right things, whatever the reason is, I don't like them. I prefer natural mysteries. So in this case, in each of these episodes, we're going to take a famous case on a subject. And by the end of that show, you're going to be given the who, the where, the what, the why, the where, the when, and the how. You're going to be given everything, so that by the end of that episode, you can say, aha, it has been solved. It's been nailed. Maybe your own theory was wrong. Now you'll know why, because you'll know how it was determined, whatever the facts were. You'll know what they really were. You'll know when they happened. So that's, to me, is what is the most exciting thing about this show, is because we have resolution. It won't be that it's going to be about subject X and then a week later we still don't know. No, it's going to be solved definitively, and you can show your friends and settle a lot of arguments, win some bets, whatever you want to do. People talk about this stuff all the time, but there's very few networks that will do the right thing to bring what is ultimately resolution to a subject. And let me easily prove that. Bigfoot, okay? Ghosts. If you look at other networks, what they're doing out there, even National Geographic, as factual as they have been historically, still perpetuates the myth of Bigfoot. You look at these ghost hunter series that have been going on for years, they're still hunting for ghosts. Well, why haven't they found any after all these years? Could it be that they're either not competent ghost hunters? Could it be that ghosts don't exist? Could it be they're looking in the wrong places? You don't know, because they don't do anything to solve that issue. I don't know about you, but if I believed a guy was a credible ghost hunter, and I'm watching his show for 3 or 4 years, I'd be like, I'm kind of getting bored here, because unless you just miss the ghosts in every episode, or there's a close call, or it's stringing you along and leaving you hanging there, after 3 or 4 years, if you haven't still found anything, you need to look in the mirror and reassess your so-called expertise or skills. And then, of course, you got people out there with this equipment where they're taking these types of measurements, electromagnetic fields or whatever. That's, again, another whole can of worms. But the difference in this show is that when a case is tackled, it is tackled and solved permanently so that you can move on to the next thing. Now, that doesn't mean everything out there can be explained. There's going to always be a lot more mysteries than there will be solutions for them. We will never know everything that there is to know, no matter how long we live or where we are. It's just reality of nature here. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of stuff that we are certain of, that we can prove. There is a lot of stuff, and it's time to focus on that, because what happens is this, and I've seen this as a researcher and those who have been into the paranormal and other subjects as long as I have, for decades. You see this pattern. You have people believing something initially. Then, of course, you have a minority of people claiming the opposite. And then, of course, after a while, the conspiracy crowd wins because their opponents eventually give up or just get bored and move on to other things. And because there's no more opponents to debate or fire back, the other side wins due to the path of least resistance. And that's not right. I never thought I'd see the day when over 20% of the population isn't sure the earth is round. I mean, I remember hearing as a young kid so-called flat earthers, people who believe the earth is flat, and they were always a single-digit phenomenon, meaning I could count maybe on one finger the number of people I knew personally who believed the earth was flat. But when you get into astrology and Bigfoot and Kennedy's assassination of Roswell and Loch Ness Monster and MJ-12 and all this other stuff going on, supposedly, in this so-called mysterious universe, then of course the numbers jump incredibly. They not only go from single digits, they go to the majority. The majority of the American people know Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy, not a single gunman. They know Roswell involved the secret crash and recovery of aliens by the U.S. government. See, this is the problem. They know, and they know by huge numbers. And the reason they know is because they can copy and paste from Wikipedia or other places on the internet, or they can show you a clip where somebody's saying something, so it must be true. This lack of credible investigation, this lack of identifying who, what, where, why, when, and how, and holding people accountable, a lot of that has gone by the wayside. And what you're going to see in this upcoming series where we do solve these cases is you're going to be presented chapter and verse on it. You're going to be able to independently verify the data yourself, and you will, if you want to, start to be able to hold people accountable because you'll be armed with all the facts, and that's all you need, because the best way you can win any argument or settle it is with facts. If you stick with facts, you can't lose. And again, that's why I'm excited about this show. I'm honored to be hosting it, and I can't wait for these episodes to get done and eventually air sometime later this year. And this is only one of two very special projects going on. Hopefully next week I'll be able to tell you about the other one in next week's episode of Kal's Corner online here on the radio show. Thanks for joining me. We'll be back again next week on the X-Zone Broadcast Network.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.